I suck at jiu-jitsu? How do I suck less at jiu-jitsu?
I guess to suck less.
The diabolical leader of the Headlock
Hey everybody, this is Josh McKinney, and I just want to welcome you to the newest episode of the I Suck at Jiu Jitsu show. So today, we are going to be answering a few of the most important questions that you could have for your own jiu-jitsu game. The first one being, is my jiu-jitsu game complete? So I will give you guys 3 different methods to actually completing your jiu-jitsu game. And these are repeatable. You'll be able to use these indefinitely for a very long time. And I think that for a lot of people, certain things are going to click on this episode, and it's going to be kind of game-changing things. But no, I don't think it's going to be like a specific technique that is going to be the game changer. I don't think you're going to see me at a tournament in a year and go, Josh, that episode convinced me to focus on the John Wayne sweep from half guard. I think that what you'll do is like, hey, Josh, that episode helped me know what I should be working next, helped me actually not run into these plateaus anymore, because I'm like, what? Do I have a focus? Should I have a focus? I'm just kind of being random with my jiu-jitsu. I don't feel like I'm getting any better. It feels like other people are even catching up to me. And so if those things are you, if you are somebody who's struggling with, do I have a complete game? Or even struggling with, what move should I be working next? What position should I be working next? Or you are somebody who's starting to get to this level where you go, it feels like I know all that I could know, but I'm just not good at it, right? And so we're going to be able to address all of those things. But first, let's talk about what a complete game is in jiu-jitsu and why it matters at all. So to me, a complete game in jiu-jitsu is what we should all strive for. And simply put, a complete game is, if you say someone with a complete game, that would be somebody who, no matter what position you put them in, no matter what scenario you put them in, they know their next move. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they successfully hit that next move every single time. It just is as simply put as knowing your next move. And so the position we can start with, let's say double underhooks and mount, and you're on bottom. Do you know your next move from that position? So to think about this, it could be different for everybody, right? There isn't a true way in jiu-jitsu that is like, you have to do this move from this position. It's always different. That's why I love the term when people will say, like, they won't use the term jiu-jitsu and they'll use the term grappling, because jiu-jitsu is the art, but grappling is the action, right? It is how good you are at performing the art. And so if you think about double underhooks from mount, maybe your move is some type of off balance to just get the top person to post a hand. And now you have one underhook. You've kind of gotten a little bit better of a position. And then your next move is to decide whether you bridge and roll on the arm that is still underhooked, or you try to elbow escape on the arm that isn't underhooked, right? And again, this is just, these are just simple steps, but there's no submission. Even if you're brand new, even if it's your first day of jiu-jitsu and you're listening to this episode and you're like, well, if I started from double underhooks and mount on Josh, you would probably submit me. There is no submission for me to do there. You have access to a lot of submissions. I have access to none. Even when I just trap your ankle into the position they call quarter guard, even when I do that, there is still no submission for me. I need to get a step further in my position. Maybe it's I push your knee down and I have you in a more true half guard. And there is some option of submission, but really not a lot. And it's going to be based on how the top person responds to all of these things. And so being able to go step by step in your jiu-jitsu, especially like the higher the level the person you're going with, that to me is a complete game. And this idea of this episode came from I complimented one of my students. I've never done that before, complimented anybody, but I complimented one of my students. I was watching him train last week, and on my way out of the gym, I'm like, hey, dude, your jiu-jitsu really looked good today. And he's a purple belt. And it's like, I think a lot of people, when they first start jiu-jitsu, it's not hard to decide what to work because you just show up and your coach shows you a move and then you go, okay, I'll try that move. And you are equally bad at every move to start. And so when you're just getting a couple % increase in that move, it feels life-changing. It's like, oh my gosh, this works so well. But then what happens, maybe more at like end of white belt, mid blue belt days, a lot of times you start to go, oh, I have a complete jiu-jitsu game. When we go from closed guard, I know scissor sweep and I know arm bar. When we go from half guard, I know John Wayne sweep, I know get to deep half, I know wrestle up. When we're in bottom mount, I know bridge and roll, I know elbow escape. And so you have something on the checklist for every single position. But the problem is those are jiu-jitsu moves, and a move isn't always the goal. Okay. So like I said, from double underhooks in mount, this is a terrible position. Really, there isn't a move for me. There isn't a technique that you see that says, and you can find a YouTube video and you can see this point, but there isn't a technique that you'll see that will go, okay, double unders from mount, make one movement, and then you'll be out of the position and you'll be on top and you'll be in mount. There is no move like that. That is because any technique that you see that is a double under from mount escape is actually a bunch of moves tied together, right? Just like how I explained them. The first thing that's probably going to happen is you're going to try to get your arm free. The next thing that's going to happen is you're going to either try to get your other arm free, right? And these are just little incremental fights. Knowing which little incremental fight to start to go to next is how you decide whether or not your game is complete. But like I said, back to the story, I compliment one of my students. Like I said, first time ever doing that. It was so crazy to give a compliment. It's like, man, I got to talk about this on the podcast. But I just had been watching him the whole day or the whole training session. It was like, man, he not only did well with a lot of people, but he was in probably 15 different positions. And he ended up getting to his favorite sweeping position and then his favorite submission position on top in all 15 scenarios. All 15 scenarios were different, but he knew how to incrementally fight to where he stands the best chance with the person he's going with. And that, to me, is a complete jiu-jitsu game. Is each time you put me somewhere, do I know how to win the next step? Do I know what the next fight is, right? A lot of times the next fight is something as simple as get the hand off your collar, get free your underhook, keep your elbows tight in this position. There are so many times, though, that you go, no, it's a technique. It's a move that I need to be doing. When you start to roll with your coach, and especially when you're new, a lot of times you'll notice, some coaches are different, but a lot of times you'll notice, man, it feels like my coach only does 5 moves, like over and over and over again. Or the black belts on the team, they only do like 5 moves over and over and over again. There's 2 things to think about with this. One is that's how hard it is to get good at any one move in jiu-jitsu, is that most black belts have like 2 to 5 moves that they really do consider themselves black belt at. But then on top of that, they can hit those 2 to 5 moves on you over and over and over again. It's because they have a complete game. Their game is built around getting them to those 2 to 5 moves. It doesn't have to be, oh, these are all the techniques I know. A lot of times they're really good at fighting 5% better, 5% better, 5% better over and over and over again. And we're going to be able to kind of talk about, and I know that this sounds like an idea that is unattainable, especially when you're new, but I'm going to kind of give you what it looks like to attain a complete jiu-jitsu game, and then how once you have a quote unquote complete jiu-jitsu game, how you can break it back down and then rebuild it better over and over and over again. And for me, I've done jiu-jitsu for almost 17 years now. And this is something that I have done in my jiu-jitsu, especially like after purple belt. I've probably done 5 different times where I had redone my jiu-jitsu and said, no, I'm not going to do it this way. We're going to make a big change. And honestly, all of those changes were always built around my game isn't complete. My game isn't complete. And so let's go ahead and talk about the first method. We're going to get really deep into completing your jiu-jitsu game this whole time. But the first method is saying like, okay, I am at the very beginning. I don't know what the heck this guy's talking about on this podcast. I just want to know what next move I should be working on, or next position I should be working on. So if that is you, if you feel like you lose most rounds that you go, I don't think the other 2 methods are worth even focusing on for you. But you'll also notice that this idea of reverse engineering is going to be relevant even if you're very good at jiu-jitsu. So the first thought with reverse engineering to decide what you should be working on is think about the rounds that you do throughout the week and try your best. And if you can't just define this right off the top of your head, maybe just get into practice, get a little notebook, get something that you can actually mark down where you are spending most of your time in the round. When you first start jiu-jitsu, if people are pretty good at your gym, and they're not overly nice to you, you're probably spending most of your time in bottom side control. And you can look at it by percentage. A lot of times, your first 6 months, like 80% of the time is spent in bottom side control. And so a lot of people go, well, like, I should work my closed guard, so then I'm not being put in bottom side control. The problem is, most likely, you're going to end up in bottom side control again and again. And you're only getting 10, 15% of your time in closed guard. If you think about it like this, how much opportunity do you have to work bottom side control? Man, you have more opportunity than almost anybody else in the gym. So that should be your first focus. That is where you are starting from, is this bad position because everybody puts you there anyway. And so your first thought process should be like, how do I survive bottom side control, right? I'm getting submitted. You can even take it a step further. Not only am I spending 80% of my time in bottom side control, I'm getting Americana'd most of the time as the finish from bottom side control. So we can even go further on the reverse engineering, and you can ask your coach. One, you don't ask how to get out of the Americana, right? Or the Kimura or the straight arm lock. The first thing you do is you say, Coach, I'm being put in bottom side control. How do I avoid the Americana? How do I keep from getting put here? Because once you're deep in a submission that's fully locked, you have made so many layers of mistakes. Let's say you go, okay, well, now I'm going to learn how to escape the Americana, and you escape it by straightening your arm. Well, now you're in a straight arm lock. And so you escape the straight arm lock by bending your arm in the opposite direction. Well, now you're in a Kimura, and it's a north-south Kimura, so the position's even different. You learn to escape that. Well, do you see how we're not actually solving any problems by just learning to escape? There's always going to be a new submission. The real problem is that you were in bottom side control and your elbows got separated from your body, right? So your coach will, if your coach is good, will be like, dude, keep your elbows tight. Keep your hands in between you and your opponent. Don't have your arms dangling about like the flappy arms, inflatable. What is that from Family Guy? I can't remember. I'm sure somebody in the comments will hit me with the quote on that. But yeah, you don't want your arms out. That would be the first problem to start to solve, okay? Once your arms are getting tighter and you're going, wow, I'm kind of surviving this position, that's when you start to go, how do I escape this position? Well, I need to get out from under him. I need to get my knee in front. Luckily for you, you're strimping up and down the mats for 15 minutes every class, and that easily translates to another human being being on top of you and putting their weight on you. I was being sarcastic. It doesn't. But what I mean on that is now you have this next thought of where to work. And what that is going to be is some type of escape from side control, most likely to a half guard. A lot of the time, you have now answered your next question of, well, what position should I be working? Well, now we're not spending 80% of our time in bottom side control. We're only spending about 50% of our time in bottom side control. So you can keep working that, keep trying to get better at that. But now we should probably start to add some offense. We should probably start to say, well, if I'm in half guard now for 40% of the time, maybe I should start some sweeps. Maybe I should or try to get back to an even better position that I like. Maybe I like close guard. Maybe I like spider guard. Maybe I like whatever. But that's how we can start to build off of the reverse engineering of that original question of I'm always in bottom side control. I'm always getting Americana'd. How do I avoid the Americana? Okay, so now I'm just always in bottom side control. How do I escape bottom side control? And this is very, very simple, or a very simple way to look at beginning in jiu-jitsu, beginning as a grappler and starting to get a little better. And what you'll find is that there are going to be a million answers for these questions that you're having. But if you try to do all of them, you'll probably get no good result. If you start to focus on just one of these answers, maybe the one escape that your coach shows you from side control that he really loves, and you start to try that, and you keep trying. Every time you fail on it, you can go to your coach and say, hey, I'm stuck here again. How do I fix this? How do I fix this? I think it's a really easy way to know what to work next. The problem is, like I said, this reverse engineering method is more built around beginners. Yes, you can reverse engineer as you get better and better at jiu-jitsu, especially if you have good training partners, right? Good training partners will always be testing your game. And but not all of us have access to really good, tough rounds. As you start to get better, a lot of times you start to be the standout in your own gym. And so that is where I think it's important to add the end goal method. I don't think you end goal method unless you are starting to feel some quote unquote completeness to your jiu-jitsu game. You know moves to go for from every position. But now, for most of the time, that's how we learn jiu-jitsu is like, okay, we reverse engineer it, start to learn moves from every position, then start to get all right at these moves. But the problem is we grow so incrementally in that method. You don't make big leaps in your jiu-jitsu when you're doing that. And a lot of times it's this habit, this thing we talk about in jiu-jitsu all the time. It's because you became the victim of 1,000 moves. And the victim of 1,000 moves is the guy that shows up to class every single night, drills what they're supposed to be drilling every single night, but never focuses on their own game. Never decides like, this is what I should be hitting more of. This is where I should be focused. It's just like, instead of always knowing the next move, you just always know a move, right? And there's a difference there between always knowing a move and always knowing the next move. There are a million moves to go for. There are a million things to try. But as you start to build your own game, you'll start to go, well, I prefer being on this side when I'm playing half guard. I prefer winning the underhook instead of playing with a whizzer. I prefer going to collar grip instead of this, right? And you start to gain these preferences. This is good. If you're not doing that, if you're going, man, I'm about the same skill level at every single thing that I try at every single position, this isn't good. This is not a good way to get good at jiu-jitsu. One of the best ways to fix the victim of 1,000 moves is what we call the end goal method. You choose an end goal position or submission. The first time I've ever really defined this method and then did it was I was a brown belt and I was on a guy's back at No-Gi Worlds for like 4 minutes and I could not finish the guy. And I was really frustrated with myself. I eventually finished him, but it was because he looked up at the clock and I got a rear naked choke. I just had no ability to trap the hands. I really didn't understand the position very well. I could control it, but I couldn't finish. And so I spent 6 weeks trying to master the back. And I got really good at trapping the arms, and I got really good at finishing rear naked chokes and just other basic back chokes. And it was because I chose to focus on it. Had I have just done those 6 weeks doing whatever, I would have still had that glaring hole, that glaring piece of being incomplete in my jiu-jitsu. But instead, we focused, and honestly, that is where the end goal method really was born. And the idea, I have a thing on the Isaka Jiu-Jitsu Pro called Master Any Position in 6 weeks. And so if you like this episode, you will love that that instructional. It's only on the Isaka Jiu-Jitsu Show Pro. There's a link in how to get that. You also get access to a million other really cool things. But the big thing for people to understand is when you end goal, the reason it works is because so often we just don't focus in jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is mindless to us, which is fun. It's part of the fun of it. But also part of the fun of it is getting really good at it. One of the things that keeps you really consistent in jiu-jitsu is getting good at jiu-jitsu. When you start to notice plateaus, those are the times that people start to fall off and they start to quit. I don't ever see people quitting when they're having these huge leaps in their jiu-jitsu game. It's when things start to feel stale. And so one of the biggest things is end goal method. This is so helpful. It's so easy to do. How you do it is you pick the end goal position and you say for this next period of time, and I like the periods of times I claim is 6 weeks to 6 months. But for this period of time, I'm going to only focus on ... And at first, it's going to be an end goal position. It's going to be arm bar from close guard. It's going to be rear naked choke from the back. It's going to be cross collar choke from mount. And how you focus on it is you go like, even if I'm seeing other stuff, I'm not going to take it. I am going to force myself to get good at the cross collar to a point where like guys know that I'm trying to get to mount and that I'm trying to cross collar choke them. And your training partners will actually start to get better at defending mount. They'll get better at defending the cross collar choke. And this is, again, where people get discouraged. They're like, oh, crap, it doesn't work anymore. No, you focus on it until you figure out how to make it work again. And the more times you do this, the more times your training partner comes back at you with something new, the more looks you're getting. And again, the more complete your game is getting, even by just focusing on one finish, right? You are finding all these new avenues to get to mount, going for that cross collar. The other thought on the end goal method, I don't remember what this phenomena is off the top of my head, but I've referenced it before when I always remember to Google it before the episode. But it is this idea that when you're going to go, when you decide you want to buy a Prius, and you really haven't noticed any Priuses on the road, but as soon as you make the decision of like, man, I'm really thinking about buying a Prius, you will start to notice Priuses everywhere. And maybe this is because we live in a simulation, or the probably simpler explanation is that those Priuses have been there forever. But we have so many things that we see on a daily basis, so many different car makes and models that we see on a daily basis. And a lot of them, most of them, stop standing out. They just become what we see while we're driving. But then when you decide like, yeah, Priuses, I really love Priuses, you literally start to see them everywhere. The reason is not because they just all got bought when you had the idea. The reason is because you are finally looking for them. You are finally noticing them. And that's why I love this end goal position idea, is because if you're looking for triangles and like, man, I'm kind of good at triangles, I want to get better at them, what you'll start to see is that there were all kinds of positions that you go get in all the time, and you could try to take another step towards the triangle. But because you're not focused on the triangle, you're just kind of focused on nothing. You just do whatever, and you don't build any consistency in your game. But then you start to go, oh, look, there's a triangle here. Oh, there's a triangle here. Oh, there's a triangle here. Those triangles have been there forever, but you just weren't hitting them because you weren't paying attention to them. The other note on this is if you are going to start to do end goal method, if you're going to say whatever position, I want to get better at it, the first part of getting good at a move in jiu-jitsu generally is missing that move, but actually noticing that you missed it. So if you're trying to get good at guillotines, you're trying to get good at triangles, you will start to see triangles and then be like, oh, I should have went for a triangle like 3 seconds ago. And that's okay. A lot of times you get discouraged by that. Instead, you should change the thinking to, oh, I should hit a triangle. If I can get 2 seconds, and before I notice it, if I can even attempt it and miss it, this is me getting better. Because again, these are like the incremental steps of getting better. Is you start to see it a little bit, you start to see it and then go for it and miss it. Then you start to see it, go for it, and hit it successfully. And usually you hit it successfully once. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, am I good at triangles yet? I'm like, no, you need a lot of reps. When we used to be, I feel like now I run my gym a little more organically. That's a whole episode in itself. But I used to be more defined with how I would make people work on specific things. And not that I don't do this when it's necessary. It's just it's becoming less and less necessary, I'm finding, for where my gym is at and how we're running things right now. But back like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, we would just end goal method things to death. And my big criteria for blue belt was I needed people to become high-level blue belt at one thing before I would give them their blue belt. I don't care if they sucked everywhere else, if they just kind of had a basic idea of how to do the other things. But if they are high-level blue belt at Kimura, high-level blue belt at hip bump, that was my indicator to promote this person. And the reason is because once you start to gain a level in a position, once you start to get good at a position, it makes you actually be able to know and feel what it feels like to be high-level blue belt at something. When you first start, you don't know what it feels like to be especially black belt level at something. You're just kind of like, well, I think I'm all right at this. I can do it on some other white belts. But when you start to be able as a white belt to hit a certain submission or a certain position against blue belts, you start to go, oh, wow, so this is what it's like to be good at something. And those blue belts are like, man, if I can hit this purple belt with my best sweep, that's what it feels like to be purple belt level at something. And then you can try to bring up all of the other positions that you're trying to get good at. But at first, it's much easier to just get better at one thing. Also, on the end goal, let's move on. We'll get back to both of those other methods after we talk about the third method. So maybe end goal method isn't working for you. Maybe reverse engineering isn't working for you. And I would say that this is another way to deal with being the victim of 1,000 moves. But this is, to me, more of you are getting better. You're maybe purple belt level at jiu-jitsu, and you're starting to go, I just don't know how I can bridge that gap to brown or especially black belt. And to me, the most important thing that you can do in that game is to simplify it. This episode was brought to you by BJJ Mental Models Premium and a really cool gift that they want to give to I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show listeners. This is an I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show exclusive. There is a free 7-part course with Rob Bernacki, one of the kind of leaders on conceptual teaching and conceptual frameworks in jiu-jitsu. And he basically gives you his entire conceptual framework for free in a 7-part course on BJJ mental models. This is at bjjmentalmodels.com/I suck. There's a link in the description. And again, this is free. for I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show listeners and I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show listeners only. The course is called Jiu-Jitsu for Imbeciles, which, I mean, it makes sense that they give it to the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show listeners, you know? They're like, oh man, the imbecile leader, Josh McKinney, he'll love to give this to all the people that listen on the weekly basis to the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show. But it is available, again, for free, only at bjjmentalmodels.com. Be sure to check it out. What that means is when you go with somebody who's really, really good at jiu-jitsu and then a good teacher, and this is like, I feel like this is less common. You deal with more guys that are good or more guys that are good teachers. You don't get to go with many people that are like really high-level jiu-jitsu and are very good at explaining what they're doing. But when you get that chance, you roll with that person and then you say, what were you doing in smashed half guard? I've never felt anything like that. And then they can define it like, most people's head is here and I put my chest here instead. Most people's knees are on the floor and I keep my toes on the floor. And then you're like, yeah, but what else? They're like, that's it. I won my distance better and I kept my weight on you. And you're like, shoot, why is that so simple? Well, it's because once you get really good, you can feel your way through things, but you don't necessarily know how to explain what's happening. A lot of times it's just by feel. Once you get really good, it starts to become something so simple in your mind that all you have to do is, and you hear there's so many ways that people explain things in jiu-jitsu, like, oh yeah, I'm just always trying to get the head. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Like, well, I'm just always trying to get the head. But what if their hands stop you? Well, I pummel and I keep trying to get to the head. Like, oh, well, that's interesting. You know, that's a simple way to look at it. And a lot of times that comes from this person putting years and years and years on the mat and then trying to boil down everything that they learned into like one sentence. And yes, they can explain that sentence 1,000 other ways, but they have it boiled down to one sentence. And so this may not be like simplifying things, especially conceptualizing things, as I'm talking about, seems so foreign to people. And there's a few ways to look at it. We'll look at first, let's say that you are high level, or at least you consider yourself high level at a move or a position. One of the simplest things to ask yourself is, if I made you say just what is the most important thing, you can only put it in 5 to 10 words, the most important thing on whether or not this triangle that you do, whether or not this half guard sweep that you do, whether or not any of these things that you do work well. What is the most important thing? Most of the time you'll have an answer. You'll be like, oh, underhook, being on your side. And then I'll go, oh, and you'll be like, well, that's not anything impressive. But then if I say, well, I see a lot of people try to get on their side and they don't get this sweep to work. Like, and then you go, yeah, but they're not really on their side. I'm like, whoa, what do you mean? Tell me more. And a lot of times you go, yeah, people, you know, when they're on their side, they're still kind of on their back a little bit. I want them to almost be on their chest. Like, I'm going to be like really, really on my side, excessively on my side. And then you start to go, then I can even ask, like, are there other positions that this happens in jiu-jitsu? And you'll be like, oh, yeah. When I have a whizzer and I'm trying to do a throw, you know, I'm giving that same pressure. Like, oh, wow, that's really cool. This is a really simple idea. This is you simplifying your jiu-jitsu game, because not only does it help you teach, it'll actually help you in rounds, because you have this litmus test to always go back to. Like, you're going with somebody who's a little better and maybe he's playing the position a little different, but you can start to go, wait, all he's doing is keeping me from being on my side like I like to be. And then you make those little adjustments to get back on your side. So the third method, the third thing to complete your jiu-jitsu game is to start to simplify it. Is to, and this is like, there's a level of just putting definition in your jiu-jitsu. It is simplifying your game. But the best guys seem to think the least. And when I see guys like that are really, really good at jiu-jitsu and I ask them something, a lot of times you, like myself, and I'm sure you too, you get frustrated by how simple their answer is. And you need it re-explained and re-explained and re-explained because they have gotten so good at it that it has become simple to them. That should be the goal. Every time that I do jiu-jitsu now, my thought process tends to be very simple. A lot of times, like I'll give you guard retention as one of my things I'm best at in jiu-jitsu. And a lot of times, even at black belt, I'll start a match, I'll get grips, I'll start to engage, and then I will notice that the top person is not covering distance at all, meaning that they're trying to Toriando and grab these grips that they like and all these things, but they are never trying to get their chest over my chest. Trinity of Guard Passing also is on I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show, or I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Pro if you sign up for it. And we talk about the idea of chest over chest, but I don't feel it. And so to me, a lot of the time, like I used to get tunnel vision, especially in competition, like, oh, well, just I look for my submissions, look for my whatever. And anymore, when I feel a guy not knowing how to create distance, my game becomes even simpler. My game is like, oh my gosh, okay, how about you just stand over there this whole time? And then when you finally gain enough courage to try to close distance, I'm going to time it and I'm going to hit my sweeper submission, right? Because you're not putting me behind it all because you're missing out on, to me, from my perspective, one of the simplest things that you could be doing and you should be doing when you're on top and you're trying to pass my guard. And so on bottom, I'm just able to keep my frames and be like, well, now he's like, since he's just standing way back there, he's letting me get better grips. And again, it's back to that, like I'm incrementally getting in a better spot and a better spot and a better spot. And that has only come with years of doing guard retention, but then on top of that, years of trying to conceptualize and teach what I do from guard retention. And then on top of that, seeing how other people simplify guard retention. That is the other part of simplification this is something that I think anybody could do. This is not something that you have to be a high level black belt at, but you are able to, if you're able to kind of see patterns. For instance, let's say you want to get good at passing spider guard. And so you watch 25 different videos from 25 different coaches on passing spider guard. They may all give different moves, 25 different moves to pass this guard. But what's interesting is you may notice that they don't all, that maybe of the 25, 10 of them gave one sentence that was remarkably similar. I find that my arms being a little looser makes this matter. I find that pummeling my hands under makes this matter. That is simplifying your jiu-jitsu. You going, oh, well, maybe I should always start. Maybe plan A should always be to just pummel my hands under. And, it works a good percentage of the time. Well, when it doesn't, that's when you can go to your next question of like, well, okay, when it doesn't, why is it not working? And then you can refer back or whatever. But the sentences that stick out to you in an instructional tend to be the simplification of your own jiu-jitsu. We could watch the same instructional and get completely different things out of it. But one of the things that's most important is, does it make my own jiu-jitsu easier to understand? Because if it's easier to understand, yes, it's easier to teach, but also in the round, the less thoughts running through my head, the better. The less things that I have to go, wait, is my hand in the perfect position? Because I like to have it here on the collar or here on the collar. Those things really aren't that effective. They aren't that helpful. But if you can go with your grip and go, I have this grip on the collar because it keeps his head from getting away from me. And so anytime he tries to get his head away from you, maybe you need to adjust your grip, right? Because you know a simpler process, a simpler version of what you are trying to accomplish. And so to put everything back together, we look at reverse engineering, we look at end goal methoding, or methoding, I guess, or simplifying our current game. Of those three things, one of them probably stuck out to you more than the others. And again, this is kind of a version of simplifying your jiu-jitsu, is you go, this is where I'm at right now. An end goal method makes a lot of sense for what I'm trying to accomplish. If that's you, give yourself, commit to 6 weeks to 6 months of focus on a position. Again, if you like the end goal method, check out the course, Master Any Position in 6 weeks. It's only available in the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show Pro. If you guys get rowdy enough in the comments, I could make it available, I guess, for like buying it just outright, buying it individually. But I don't know. Maybe we could. Maybe we should. Who knows? Or maybe you're going, yeah, I am finding that I don't really have a lot of control of where I'm ending up. I'm just always ending up in this bad spot. Well, then that is how you start to reverse engineer. And you go, okay, well, how do I start to get better at defending whatever position? Obviously, we talked about bottom side control. Let's say it's bottom mount. How do I get better at surviving bottom mount? Now, how do I get better at escaping bottom mount? And then your next step is going to be, well, where do I end up? My goal should eventually be to be on offense again, right? All of these kind of reverse engineering positions tend to be that we are not on offense. And then, of course, the last thing we just talked about is simplifying your game. Now, I think it's really important to note that as you get better at jiu-jitsu, you will start to find preferences where you're like, yes, this is the game that I love. This is all that I want to play. There are times that the only way to take another step forward is to throw that all away. It's to throw away all the ideas that you have and say, I'm going to do a factory reset, right? When it comes to fixing things, my go-to is like, my wife will always be like, my computer's not working, or this isn't working. And then it'll take me like 30 seconds and I'll be like, okay, I fixed it. And she'll be really upset. She's like, how did you fix it so fast? I'm like, well, I only know one way to fix anything electronic. Turn it off and then turn it back on. And then maybe if that doesn't work, unplug it and then plug it back in and then turn it back on. That's the end of my electronic expertise. But it works for some reason. I don't know why it works in electronics, but in jiu-jitsu, this also works. There have been times in my jiu-jitsu that I went, I need to make a big change. For example, the first time ever for me was like mid purple belt, when I was noticing guys were getting harder to finish off my back. And those guys that were avoiding being submitted off my back were accepting sweeps a little easier, but my top game wasn't good enough to deal with them. My game was incomplete. And so I started to go, well, I need to get better at a position. I told you guys that the first thing I ever end goal methoded was the back at brown belt, but I guess I did that without even realizing that that's what I was doing as a purple belt when it came to knee cuts and passing De La Riva and eventually passing reverse De La Riva. Those were the two positions I was stuck in a lot. And it started to, my guard stayed the same, but it started to win me so many more matches because I actually felt good about being on top. And instead of sweeping to score points because my game was incomplete, I was sweeping to play top because my game was starting to be a little more complete. And of course, there was a learning curve to that too. There were matches that I probably could have triangled the guy and won, and I ended up getting submitted on top because I was so focused on, I want to be better at playing on top. And so there is a level when, I talk about throwing out your game, you're probably going to lose more in the beginning, right? We talk about this habit a lot of removing the strength from your jiu-jitsu. So many people fear that, are so afraid to try to remove their physical attributes from their jiu-jitsu because they're like, but I'll lose more. I'm like, yeah, at first. But anytime you start anything new, in theory, you're a white belt at it, right? In jiu-jitsu or not in jiu-jitsu, anytime you're new at something, you are brand new at it. And so if you've always had physicality tied in your jiu-jitsu game, strength, speed, flexibility, explosiveness. There are other ways you can define, physicality, but if you've always had those tied into the techniques in the jiu-jitsu that you can do, when you try to remove them, it's going to be hard. You are going to lose more rounds, but you're also going to find huge holes in your jiu-jitsu game, huge pieces where your jiu-jitsu game is incomplete. And so one of the best things to do in that scenario is to go like, no, I'm going to force myself, even if I have to lose a bunch of rounds to guys that are lower belts than me, I'm going to force myself because I know in the long run, this is going to actually complete my game. And so often we just get so addicted to winning. We just are like, man, and like this is in competition especially, you go, but this game works. This game is winning me so many matches. The problem is when you go with somebody that can get you out of that game, do you stand a chance? If you do, it's because you have a complete jiu-jitsu game. And so that is why, for that scenario, that is why that we should strive for it. But I just always will, anytime I go with guys, the best grapplers always know their next move. And that all being said, something I probably should have said earlier in this is it's really easy to go, okay, got it. Next move should be that I am doing the scissor sweep from close guard because that's what Josh said. But maybe you don't play close guard. Maybe you are better at figuring out, maybe you're better at spider guard. And so maybe your next move isn't an offensive move from there. Maybe it's just getting good at going from close guard to spider guard. The other example, and this is one that I think is starting to gain more traction now. But when I was doing it back in my day, when I was doing this and telling my students to do this, this was such a crazy idea. I used to, I remember Eric Huebner and I were talking when he was a purple belt. And he had been training with me a lot, but he had just officially come under to where he was just training at my gym and I was going to be his only coach. And he says to me something along the lines of hey, I really want to know your expectations of me. So what guard do you want me working? And what do you think about that? And I said, Eric, you're 265 pounds and you've wrestled for 20 plus years and you have some of the best wrestling that I've ever felt. If you are playing guard, and then I kind of paused okay, let me ask you this. If you had to play guard in a competitive jiu-jitsu match, what would that mean? He said, well, it'd probably mean that the guy took me down. And I said, if somebody was good enough to take you down, and they were that good of a wrestler, I go, how long do you think that it would take you to work closed guard or spider guard or half guard or whatever? How long do you think that it would take you to work that and be good enough to sweep that guy back? And he looked at me and he goes, well, if he was good enough to take me down, I'd probably never sweep this guy back. And I was like, yes, I agree with that. And so what's the point there, right? And so we didn't work guard for him at all. We just avoided that position, that huge part of jiu-jitsu. He was forced to positional spar bottom side control twice a week. He was forced to positional spar bottom mount twice a week. He's forced to positional spar the back, somebody on his back twice a week. And what ended up happening is he eventually developed his own guard, and it was how to wrestle up. And he got really, really good at wrestling up when he was on his butt, to a point that a lot of guys he goes with, he could probably just sit on his butt and know that he's going to be on top pretty soon. He got really good at the defensive aspects of saying, well, I'm in bottom side control. How do I get back to a little bit better? And then as he would get back to a little bit better, he would be like, well, how do I turn this into wrestling? How do I turn this into what I'm already good at? And it sounds to people like, oh, but that isn't a complete game. He doesn't know spider guard. He doesn't know this guard or that guard. Honestly, none of that is relevant because, yes, bottom side control is an unavoidable position, but bottom spider guard isn't. I have to make myself play that position. I'm not just going to land there, right? And so to act like I need to know every single guard to get to black belt doesn't make sense to me. It makes more sense to say, do you know, wherever we're starting from, do you have a way to start to get back to offense? And that is, to me, how you're able to produce a game of jiu-jitsu that is your own game. It is how you produce it's how you produce so much of the completeness that you can have in jiu-jitsu is by going, well, no matter where we are starting from, whether it's on the feet, whether it's off my butt, whether it's flat on my back, I know where I like to go next because I'm always trying to get to my offense. And this is the last part, and this is what I'll leave you with. The other thought to really keep in mind when it comes to having a complete jiu-jitsu game is don't get addicted to winning in a specific rule set. If you have a rule set that you love, do that rule set. But don't define all of your jiu-jitsu to be built around that specific rule set. And I kind of hinted at this already, but one of the worst things that I'm seeing in jiu-jitsu right now that is hurting people's game, especially in the long run, and it will really hurt at black belt. You can win at all the other belts, but guys are so good at exploiting weaknesses at black belt. If you tap to foot locks on your right leg, even guys that don't do foot locks will start to foot lock that right leg. It's just part of jiu-jitsu. That's like at the highest levels, guys they are really good at studying opponents. There's going to be footage on you. So if you have incompleteness in your game and it gets exposed, you're in trouble. So trying to address that early on matters so much. But the problem that I'm seeing at blue and purple belt especially, but I even see this at black belt, is people care more about the points than the position that the points signify. People care so much about sweeping, but they don't sweep to get on top to pass the guard. They don't play top. They don't get on top to play top. And then, like I said, you sweep and then you get submitted once you get on top, or you sweep and you get swept back into a worse position and you're exhausted now, and that guy is a little more complete in his game and now he can pass you. So when you, like the biggest habit, whatever position you land in, try to win that position. Don't do the, close guard, I'll just let the guy sweep me because I can't ever open close guard. Don't do that. You have to get out of that mindset. Or I sweep to get 2 points. No, you sweep to get on top. You sweep in order to punish your opponent for letting you get on top. You pass to half guard in order to punish your opponent for letting you get to half guard. You pass to mount in order to finish. You pass to side control in order to finish. Don't get into the habit of thinking about points being the things that matter. Look at what the points signify. Make sure you're getting good at that. If the points are, if mount points are really important to you, get good at smashing guys in mount and finishing guys from mount. And that is just the reason I say that habit is so bad, is that is what is producing so much incompleteness in people's jiu-jitsu, is they go, okay, I'm going to sweep and get 2, and then I'm going to do something to get an advantage. And then I'm going to be okay with getting swept back because now it's hard for guys to pass my guard. The guys that I see play like that are getting exposed more and more. The guys that are incomplete. And it almost looks as though they're losing to guys that aren't as good as them. But they're losing to guys that are more well-rounded. And that is the well-rounded people. As much as I tell you guys, you focus on something to get good initially at it. But then there are going to be all these other positions that you got to start to focus on. You do them all individually, but the goal should be to be well-rounded. Can you put this guy in any position, in any rule set, and him be able to start to escape and get back to his offense, to start to escape, get back to his submissions? That is, to me, how we define what makes a great jiu-jitsu game and a complete game. And so hopefully you guys liked this episode. And if you did, don't forget about the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show Pro. There is a few different things that were referenced on this, plus a bunch of other courses that I have, few courses that my dad and I have put together. Just a lot of great stuff on that. And that is only available at simplifyingjujitsu.com. And I, of course, have a link in the description for that. And don't forget, if you haven't, I didn't put the commercial in on this one, but if you haven't, give us a 5-star review, give us a comment. I'd love to hear from you guys, especially, I haven't asked her this in a while, but especially if you guys have any ideas for new episodes, any things that you're struggling with that you say, hey, I cannot solve this problem. Maybe other people are dealing with this problem. I would love Josh to solve it for me. And I would love to do that for you. But most importantly today, I hope you guys enjoy your day. And I hope that this episode helps you guys suck just a little bit less at jiu-jitsu.